Hi there. Welcome. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Josh Speyer. I'm the founder of Coherence Report. As you guys are already aware, I'm quite skeptical about the narrative around dwave. There is a free short report on our website, and then we have a deeper dive if you become a member. Now, let's talk about the agenda for today. First, I'm going to introduce myself and talk a little about coherence and what we're doing here. And then we'll dive into the report itself. We're going to talk about what dwave's customer accounts actually mean. And we're going to discuss, and part of that is discussing why people actually engage with the company and what that means for the future. And then we're going to talk about the technology fiction here, which basically means that they have no marketable technology. And we're going to discuss what this really means for the revenue picture going forward. And most importantly, is the technology going to help their revenue in the future? Then we're going to talk about the quantum AI narrative and why it is only Wall Street hype. And then we're going to talk about what I feel is an impending collapse of the commercial narrative around dwave, especially around the stock, as well as the company revenue size, the top line as well. We're going to talk about some recent headline deals that they posted and why they actually prove the opposite of what investors think. And then lastly, we're going to take some mailbag. We're going to answer some questions that were sent in anonymously. And I have a good one, actually. So stay tuned. All right. So with no further ado, let's talk about what coherence is. So the reason why I started Coherence, I feel that it is possible to find really good information about quantum computing. Companies like dwave, they know this, and they are exploiting the knowledge gap in the market. And they know because, what they know is that very little is written about their technology except by scientists for scientists. If you're not a scientist, it's really hard to understand what they're saying. So investors and outsiders, you really have to trust what they say in their press releases. And unfortunately, and that's what Coherence is here for. I want us to be a resource for investors and technology enthusiasts. I want you to understand, everything we write about is going to be comprehensive. And it's going to be based in science, but it's also going to be very understandable for people who are not a PhD. And I want us to be a resource for both investors and enthusiasts so that you can be a judge for yourself, whether the claims that companies make, the claims that companies make are hype or not, are real. The last note, we are currently running on the PBS model here, which means supported by members like you. If you find this information useful, please consider subscribing. I don't have tech funding here. Everything's coming out of my pocket. I did everything on my own, including writing these reports. And I'm just hoping to bring enough value to the community that people decide that they want to give back. All right. And so with that, a quick introduction about myself. I have 20 years of experience in both technology and revenue. I currently run an AI company that's focused on scientific research. I also have multiple patents in mathematics, but the real reason that everyone is here today is that in 2025, I actually worked for dwave. Now, it wasn't the longest tenure, but it was long enough. And I was in a position that had dotted line reports across both the technical side and the revenue side. On the technical side, I was working with Trevor Lanting, who's a CDO. And then on the revenue and commercial side, I was working with Lorenzo Martinelli, who's a CRO. Now, if you know the company, those names should ring a bell, and it should tell you exactly what level of access I had and where I was in my role there. The reason why, and then a little bit about my role there, the reason why I was brought in was because I knew how to translate engineering into revenue opportunity. And what they did is they brought me in, they asked me to focus on quantum AI. Unfortunately, my abilities worked against me because it quickly became clear that while I was talking to both sales and engineering, the story that sales was telling was very different from the story that engineering was telling. And in fact, I would go so far as saying that there was no technology worth marketing at dwave. And I realized quickly that there were no real sales opportunities moving forward. And that's why I left the company. And that's why I'm here with you today. It's because I want to bring the truth about the narrative of what's coming out, of what is really going on in what is probably quantum computing's most well-known name. All right, so let's go ahead and start the discussion. Well, we're first going to start with the customer count and metrics. Now, I am on the record here. I am publicly disputing the customer count that's being reported. I'm not saying that those numbers are wrong. Technically, the company does cover their bases here. There's no fraud. However, investors and outsiders are really misreading what the metrics are actually mean. And Alex Barrett's, he actually admits this himself on earnings calls. Now, as I've said before, the customer base that they're claiming is not what outsiders would call a customer. They say 100 paying customers, but that does not mean that they are currently paying anything significant, nor does it mean that the project is going anywhere. All right, you can just look at their revenue numbers and do some basic division and understand exactly what's going on there. All a customer means is that it's an account or a sign up somewhere. Someone somewhere went in, they wanted to check out their QCAS services, and then they provided a credit card. That's literally all that it means. And I understand that from an investor's perspective, you don't really care about what customers, you don't care about customers they have now or what the revenue they're bringing in. The reason why we're all here is because investors want to understand what will the revenue picture be 3 years from now, and what will the customer count be 5 years from now. But the thing that I am saying here is that the lack of customers in 2026 is actually predictive of the lack of customers in the future. First of all, they've been at this for years. So, supposedly they have scores of projects under their belts. So where's the revenue story going? Where's the growth story? And if it hasn't happened yet, then what exactly is going to change that makes it grow in the future? The fact is that the reason why there are no customers is that there is no long-term revenue story. The technology does not work the way it's been advertised. And we'll talk about this in later sections. Every enterprise project actually requires an unbelievable amount of consulting. And by the way, as an aside, people think that dwave is an infrastructure hyperscaler, and really, it's not. It's less like a hyperscaler and more like a consulting firm. And you can quickly confirm this with a simple LinkedIn search. Just look at the ratio of salespeople to sales engineers and project managers, and that'll quickly tell you exactly what type of firm they are. And so, where exactly is the scalability that investors are hoping for? Every deal they win, it actually costs them more money than they receive. Best way, stepping back from all this, though, I think the best way that I can help you understand, to understand what all this means, is to help you understand why customers buy QCAS in the first place. All right, because it's not what you or what investors think. And understanding what the intention is for people that are buying it, it really helps you understand customer counts and press releases and claims of future growth. And it basically means that you should be treating it all with skepticism. So let's dig into there for a second. There's multiple personas that dwave targets and does business with, but ultimately they're looking for people who are paid to run experiments on someone else's money. All right. So for example, you have university researchers chasing grants. You have government departments that have mandated innovation budgets. You have major enterprises with basically an innovation division or something similar. Every single one of these personas, every single case and customer type, these people all expect that these projects will likely go nowheres, but they engage in it because experimenting with quantum looks really good on a corporate press release. Okay, every time Walmart or just any Fortune 100 company says they're doing some experiment in quantum, it makes news, it makes the company look progressive, everyone gets accolades. The people involved with the project, they have every incentive to make the project look like a success. Nobody's going to come out and say that I spent $300,000 on a quantum annealing project and it went nowhere. There's no incentive to do that. And by going out and talking it up, they get career advancement. They can publish their research because most of these people are PhDs. They get budget retention. You get professional accolades. This is why when you see the press releases, every single proof of concept looks like a success. It's because no one has an incentive to ever say otherwise. But the problem is that when you want when you want to move that proof of concept over into, say, a supply chain executive who moves billions of dollars of inventory, those people really don't care about quantum computing. They don't care about the press release. The only thing that they care about is shaving time, shaving costs, or engaging with something that's just plug and play. D-Wave is neither of all those. And this is why so few projects actually graduate from the press release to the real revenue. So I'm going to give you an example of Patterson Food Group. People who have been around this, who've been watching D-Wave for a while, you all know that name. This company used to be one of their primary use cases, but the truth about this that no one ever talks about is this was really nothing but a replacement for a spreadsheet that they used to use. Literally any modern scheduling app could have had the same effect that the D-Wave and eArc did. But D-Wave, when they do their metrics, they don't compare against modern apps. What they do is they're comparing against the Excel spreadsheet that the company used to use. And again, the people at Patterson, no one's going to dispute that. So it looks great for everyone involved with the pilot. They love talking about D-Wave in the press. And guess what? That deal never went anywhere after that. So let's talk now. We've talked about the customers and the intentions. Let's talk about the technology fiction. There's actually a ton to talk about here, and I'm only going to shave the surface of this. I do recommend that everyone watches the deep dive on the optimization annealer, but yeah, and that's on our website. In summary, their technology doesn't solve all optimization problems. In fact, finding a problem that the quantum annealer can solve, it's a lot like threading a needle. And the problem is size, right? First of all. So if a problem is too small, a customer is just not going to pay. But if a problem is too large, then the QPU really can't handle the problem. And even if the size is right, it still needs to be something called a discrete optimization problem. And this is why so few customers actually use it. This is why investors need someone that understands the technology and the commercial application when they're evaluating targets. Because D-Wave is telling everyone that quantum annealer is an optimization solver, and it's really not. At least not a solver for 99% of the problems out there. This is, and by the way, again, it's not about what it is now, about what it is in the future. This is not something that's going to be solved with future research and development. The technology is what it is. R&D just increases the number of qubits, not the types of problems that they can solve. I think we're gonna have a discussion later on. We're gonna do a deep dive where talk about quantum computing research and development. We're gonna talk about where progress can and cannot be. So we'll dig into deeper about the roadmap for these various companies, for D-Wave and for other companies as well. And by the way, if you have any questions about the technology, you should ask Amazon Bracket. That's the AWS service. You should ask them what they think of D-Wave. I got some interesting information on that, but I can't share it right now on in this platform. All right. Now let's talk about the quantum AI initiatives. I actually know quite a lot about this because I was the person that was employed to push this forward. Now we're going to deep dive into this in a future town hall, not just about D-Wave, but we're going to talk about all of quantum computing technology and how it plays with the future of AI. I'm going to say this. I'm going to say 2 points, though. The first point is they exited this market back in July of 2025. And how do I know that? Well, because I myself was the one there that convinced them that there was no market. They left the company, and then I left the company. They haven't yet hired anyone since, at least anyone that's AI related, and they have 0 AI projects since. So remember, this company throws a parade every single time they get a client, and yet the only project they ever talk about is a project from 2024. And yet Alan Barrett, he still keeps talking about it in the quantum AI in the presence about their innovation in AI. And the only explanation on why they keep mentioning AI is because they know, and Alan knows, that it drums up investor interest. This company, I will never talk bad about them in terms of their ability to build investor hype and hanging on. That's literally the only reason why these guys are hanging on to the AI story, because they know that it's a dead end for them. All right, let's talk about the events that came about January of this year. Now, there's a lot to unpack here, and we go into a great deal of detail about this in our reports. All right, so on January 27th, it was the day that Qubit 2026 started. D-Wave released a record 5 press releases at the same time. Now, I'm not gonna criticize the release strategy itself. A lot of companies actually do that to build energy for the conference, and D-Wave actually does something similar to that every single year. They never have released 5 at the same time, but they do release multiple press releases, and that's fine. But the 2 of these releases are cause for serious scrutiny, and those are the headliners that everyone's talking about right now. The first is the FAU deal for $20 million, and then you have a $10 million deal with an unnamed Fortune 100 company. Look, by themselves, these seem like legitimate progress, but context is key, and you have to know what to look for here. Now, I'm not going to lay out the evidence here. It's all in the reports. But our assessment on these is that investors should be highly suspicious of deals that look too good to be true and don't fit ongoing pattern of what usual pattern of business for them. So let's look at the $10 million QCAS deal. This press release is actually highly unusual. If you look at the slide here, you can see they typically divulge everything they can in a release. So you see the deals on the side of the slide. Every time they do that, they name the company, they name an executive, they name the use case. But this time, there's no details except a dollar amount. In fact, the narrative itself is misleading. If you read the press release, they actually admit that this is a series of proof of concepts and not a $10 million QCAS deal. And let's for those who've been around, let me explain what a series of projects means. It means that if the first project doesn't work, the rest of the contract gets canceled. And also, why doesn't this client want to be mentioned? Even DoD projects get named. Second, we have the FAU deal. Now, we plan on running a FOIA on this, but does anyone here actually think that it's unusual for Florida Atlantic University to be the first school in 10 years to buy a quantum annealer? And I don't mean any offense to school. I don't mean any offense to anyone. If you're watching this, that if you went to it, I'm sure it's a fine university. It isn't Stanford. It's not Princeton. It's not Georgia Tech. Does anyone here think that FAU can be the next Jülich supercomputing center? In fact, if you look at the list, the only other institutions that have purchased an annealing system is USC, NASA, and Jülich. But supposedly now, FAU is just as good as them and putting money towards that. We go into a lot more detail in the report. Interestingly, though, I will say this. FAU happens to be the school. It happens to be in the same location that they moved their headquarters to. And by the way, that was announced the same exact day. So there's a lot of suspicious coincidence here. The question you have to ask yourself about FAU is that actually indicative of something that's going to happen in the future? Are they going to start signing community colleges, $20 million machines? Are they going to start Georgia Perimeter? I mean, what exactly does that mean? What can you take away from that for the future as an investor? You cannot take. This is why it's important not to take these press releases at face value. All right, so let's talk about the user conference here, because really, let's put aside the press releases. That's the reason. That's the real story here. That's the reason why dwave felt the need to post these suspicious press releases. If you know where to look, it's actually clear that this user conference was the worst one they had in years, because it revealed how their user base has completely abandoned them. And that's why dwave ended up fabricating these questionable press releases. Now, if you look at the companies that participated and then you compare it to previous years, it really becomes self-evident what's happening and what's going to come down the pipe on upcoming earnings calls. That's the real story here, not the $30 million in bookings that will never mature and we'll never see. All right, so closing, these are just a few of the problems I see in the dwave investment thesis. We actually run down a lot more about it in the due diligence report. We're going to highlight some serious issues in the business model. We talk about the technology issues, and then we have issues in specific case studies that they cite. Look, I understand that you're not investing in the stock because of what they're doing today. What you're doing is you're investing in the hope that the stock will become something better. This isn't Walmart or Microsoft where you're valuing the stock based on ratios and earnings growth. But really the point of this that I'm trying to say here is that there is no future growth opportunity either. They know this, and that's why they don't spend any of their time growing their business. They spend their time promoting the stock. That's what all this is about, the quantum AI communication, the creating exaggerated press releases, trying to hide attention away from the declining user conference. In fact, our entire 50-page due diligence document, you can read almost everything in there in the context of them manufacturing investor narrative. So one story I talk about is they spent an unbelievable amount of time getting on the Joe Rogan podcast or trying to get on there. Now, the question is, it sounds like a great idea, right? But why would a quantum computing company that is selling enterprise solutions to a technical buyer base, why would they worry about getting on the Joe Rogan podcast? And the reason is because they were there, they wanted to drum up investor interest, and that's the only thing that they're focused on. Obviously, the stock has taken a major tumble since January, but it still has a long way to go. The only assets they have is $800 million in cash, which is, by the way, that sounds like a lot of money, but it is not enough to compete in this space, especially when you talk about going up against someone like Google. They're just going to burn that $800 million. You're just going to burn it over time. They have a smattering of revenue, which costs more money to win than they make, and they have a couple of patents. So you have to ask yourself, is that worth $6 billion? And I understand that there's a lot of money to be made on trading on dwave as a high beta momentum stock. I can't advise on that at all. People on this call, people who are watching this later on, you guys are all going to know far more about that than I will. All I know is that fundamentally the company has no future growth opportunities, and everything they talk about is narrative hype, just like how they talk about quantum AI, even though they know it doesn't work. This stock has a long way to go down, even from current prices. And the catalyst I see is the upcoming earnings report. The date still hasn't been announced, whatever that means. What you're going to see when that earnings report comes out, you're going to see more of the same, which means exaggerated bookings, exaggerated press releases, minimal revenue, and Alan Barrett's talking once again about their quantum supremacy. Now, and I'll say from this standpoint, typically what I've seen is the stock reacts a week after the report. So that's the timing that I would target for when it's going to drop. So in conclusion, I just want to thank everyone for joining me, at least considering what I have to say. I've provided the context that I can here, but we're going to keep running these events and we're going to keep putting out other materials, not just about dwave, but I also just want to help everyone understand more about what's going on in the quantum computing industry. There's some exciting things happening in the industry. There's a lot of things that are just pure hype. Coherence is going to explain everything in plain language, and your support's really going to go to helping us bring out material for other companies and targets. So if you're interested in the due diligence for dwave, just feel free to email me at the address below. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I'm just happy to help. All right. Before I let you guys go, let's talk about the mailbag. So I had a fantastic question. I had to pick this one out, and I want to go through it now. So this person asks, Josh, you state that in July 2025, dwave abandoned their AI and ML projects. Why would they release a toolkit a month after abandoning the project? That is a great question. That toolkit was actually already created. It was the code that was used for Japan Tobacco in 2024. So basically, they took the code that they did for the project and they added some documentation to it. They do some adjustments to the code to make it more universally acceptable, and then they post it online. What it is, it's a small piece of code that helps with the sampling, and we'll talk more in depth with that when we talk about quantum AI. We're going to go into detail about the Japan Tobacco project later on, but essentially, dwave's involvement was actually just one tiny piece of the AI process. That's it. This is not some fundamental change in AI. And that's what the code is. So to give you an idea, and by the way, I went ahead and we started pulling on some strings here to see what exactly is going on with this piece of code, how active and widely used toolkit is. This toolkit, which got all these acclaims and excitement from investors, it has in 8 months, it's been forked 13 times, which means that it's probably been used about 5 times or 5 different people globally. And of those 5 people, only 1 is a regular contributor. So, if you want independent confirmation of how useless dwave's AI technology is, this is exactly where researchers are telling us. All right. I appreciate your time, guys. And thank you for going down this journey with me. I appreciate it.